What would you do if you were in the same circumstances with the characters in the following stories? We would very love to know, and you could share it below under the comment sections. Now, let the stories unfold.
Rain lashed against the cracked window of apartment 4B when the knocking started. It wasn't the rhythmic tapping of a neighbor, but the desperate pounding of someone entirely out of time. When 22-year-old Chloe unlatched her deadbolt, she unknowingly invited in a storm far deadlier than the one outside. The radiators in the Bridgeport apartment complex were notorious for two things: making a sound like a dying engine and failing entirely when the Chicago temperature dropped below freezing. On the night of November 14th, they were doing both. Chloe Henderson sat at her scratched laminate kitchen table, wrapped in a faded wool blanket, staring at a stack of final notices. Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Illinois Gas and Electric. Her landlord, Arthur Penhaligon, who had already threatened to change the locks by Friday. At 22, Chloe carried the exhaustion of a woman twice her age. Since her mother's passing 6 months prior, Chloe had been working double shifts at O'Rourke's Diner on 35th Street, coming home smelling of stale coffee and fryer grease, only to watch her meager wages vanish into the black hole of inherited medical debt. It was just past 2 in the morning. The sleet outside was violently pelting the glass. That was when the knock came. It was heavy, erratic, and low on the door. Chloe froze. In this part of the South Side, you didn't answer your door after midnight unless you were expecting trouble. She held her breath, hoping whoever it was would move on to the next unit. But the knocking persisted, accompanied by a muffled, ragged voice. "Please." It was the voice of a man, strained and breathless. Chloe crept to the door, pressing her eye to the tarnished brass peephole. The hallway light flickered, illuminating a terrifying sight. A tall man was leaning heavily against her doorframe. His clothes, what looked like a tailored charcoal overcoat, were ruined, soaked through with rain and a dark, heavy substance. But what made Chloe's hand fly to the deadbolt wasn't the man. It was the small, trembling bundle clutching his uninjured leg. A little girl, no older than 5, wearing a pink puffer jacket and crying silently into the man's trousers. Against every survival instinct the city had beaten into her, Chloe unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to speak. "I'm calling the police." The man looked up. His face was bruised, aristocratic, and fiercely intense. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, framed eyes that were completely devoid of panic, despite his physical state. "No police," he rasped, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "They'll be listening to the scanners. Just let my daughter inside. Just the child. I'll leave." The little girl looked up at Chloe. Her blonde curls were matted to her tear-streaked cheeks. "Daddy, no," she whimpered, her tiny voice cracking. Chloe looked up and down the empty, desolate hallway. If she left them out here, the man would likely bleed to death on her welcome mat, and the child would be left alone in a building crawling with addicts and opportunistic thieves. "Get in," Chloe snapped, swinging the door wide. "Quickly!" The man stumbled forward, his heavy frame nearly collapsing as he crossed the threshold. Chloe quickly locked the deadbolt and engaged the chain. She turned to face her intruders. Now, in the harsh, fluorescent light of her tiny kitchen, the reality of the situation set in. The man was massive, easily over 6 feet, and beneath the ruined overcoat, he wore a bespoke 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Chloe's annual rent. The dark stain on his left side was unmistakably blood. "Sit," Chloe ordered, pointing to the threadbare sofa in the living room. She looked at the little girl. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Mia," the girl whispered, clinging to her father's good arm. "Mia." "I'm Chloe. Let's get that wet coat off you." The man watched Chloe with a hawkish, predatory gaze as she gently helped Mia out of her soaked jacket and wrapped her in her own dry blanket. He didn't speak as Chloe went to the bathroom and returned with a first aid kit, a basin of warm water, and clean towels. "Take the jacket off," Chloe said to the man. "I'm fine," he said, though his skin was terrifyingly pale. "You're bleeding on my linoleum," Chloe replied flatly. "Take it off, or I'm calling an ambulance. Scanners be damned." He hesitated. then gritted his teeth and peeled off the ruined coat and the suit jacket beneath it. His white dress shirt was soaked crimson on the left side. As Chloe unbuttoned his shirt, she tried to keep her hands steady. She had seen injuries before. Her neighborhood wasn't exactly a gated community, but the wound on his side was a clean, deep graze. "That's a bullet wound," Chloe whispered, her hands freezing. "A car accident," the man corrected smoothly, without missing a beat. "A piece of shattered metal." "I'm not an idiot, mister?" "Dominic," he said shortly. He didn't offer a last name. "And you are taking a massive risk, Chloe." "I'm aware," she muttered, pressing a thick wad of sterile gauze to the wound. Dominic didn't even flinch. His pain tolerance was unnatural. As she taped the bandages down tightly, she noticed the heavy, gold Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, and the distinct, calloused knuckles of a man who knew how to use his hands for violence. Mia had curled up on the armchair, exhaustion finally pulling her into a restless sleep. Dominic watched his daughter, his hard expression softening into something raw and fiercely protective. "Why did you let us in?" Dominic asked quietly, breaking the silence as Chloe washed the blood from her hands in the kitchen sink. "I didn't let you in," Chloe said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I let her in. You just came with the package." A faint ghost of a smile touched Dominic's lips. "I won't forget this, either of us." "Just don't die on my couch," Chloe said, turning off the main light. "I have a double shift tomorrow, and I don't have time to explain a corpse to Arthur." She brought him a glass of water and a couple of ibuprofen, which he swallowed dry. Chloe retreated to her bedroom, dragging a chair under the doorknob for good measure. She didn't sleep a wink. She lay awake, listening to the heavy, steady breathing of the strange man in her living room, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. When Chloe's alarm blared at 5 a.m., the apartment was completely silent. She cautiously pushed the chair away from her bedroom door and stepped into the living room. It was empty. The bloody towels had been neatly piled in the basin. The blanket Mia had used was folded precisely on the armchair. There was no sign that Dominic or his daughter had ever been there, save for the lingering scent of rain and expensive cedarwood cologne. Chloe let out a long breath, a mixture of profound relief and strange disappointment. She walked into the kitchen to start the coffee maker and froze. Sitting squarely in the center of her small wooden table, weighed down by her ceramic sugar bowl, was a thick stack of money. Chloe approached it slowly, as if it might bite. She lifted the bowl. It was a banded stack of crisp $100 bills, $10,000. There was no note, just the money, sitting there like a radioactive brick. For a girl who had exactly $14 in her checking account, $10,000 was a miracle. But Chloe wasn't naive. Money like that, left by a man with a bullet wound, was blood money. It was dangerous. Her first instinct was to throw it in the dumpster out back. Her second instinct, fueled by the memory of her eviction notice, was survival. Later that afternoon, Chloe walked into Arthur Penhaligon's dingy ground floor office. She slapped an envelope containing $3,000 onto his desk, 6 months' rent in advance. Arthur, a greasy man with a perpetual sneer, looked at the cash, then up at Chloe with newfound suspicious interest. "Hit the lottery, Chloe?" he asked, licking his thumb as he counted the hundreds. "Tips were good," she lied smoothly, turning on her heel and leaving the office. For a week, life returned to normal. Or, as normal as it could be. Chloe paid off the hospital debt, bought real groceries, and even fixed the clanking radiator. She convinced herself that Dominic was a ghost, a strange fever dream brought on by a cold Chicago night. She was violently disabused of that notion on a Tuesday night. Chloe had finished her shift at O'Rourke's around 11:30 p.m. The walk from the bus stop to her apartment was 4 blocks through a notoriously underlit corridor of Bridgeport. As she turned the corner onto Halsted Street, a figure stepped out from the mouth of a dark alley. It was Tommy Knuckles Callahan, a low-level enforcer and neighborhood nuisance who ran a small-time loan shark operation. He had been harassing Chloe for months, trying to collect on a phantom debt her father had supposedly owed before abandoning the family years ago. "Evening, Chloe," Tommy sneered, blocking the sidewalk. He smelled of cheap beer and cigarettes. Arthur tells me you've come into some cash. Seems unfair you're paying rent when you still owe my boss. I don't owe you anything, Tommy. Move, Chloe said, clutching her pepper spray in her coat pocket. Tommy lunged, grabbing her wrist with a bruising grip. I think we need to go to an ATM, sweetheart. The screech of tires cut him off. A massive, jet-black Lincoln Navigator suddenly hopped the curb, its headlights blinding them both. Before Tommy could react, the back doors flew open. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements frighteningly synchronized. One of them grabbed Tommy by the back of his neck and shoved him hard against the brick wall of the alley, a suppressed pistol pressed firmly under the thug's chin. Tommy let out a pathetic squeak, dropping Chloe's wrist instantly. Chloe stumbled back, terrified. The tinted passenger window of the SUV slowly rolled down. Sitting in the plush leather interior, illuminated by the dashboard lights, was Dominic. He was no longer the battered, bleeding stranger from her living room. He wore a pristine midnight blue suit, a silk tie, and an expression of terrifying, absolute authority. "Get in the car, Chloe," Dominic said. It wasn't a request. "What are you doing here?" Chloe demanded, her voice shaking, though whether from adrenaline or fear, she couldn't tell. "What is going on?" "The man currently weeping against the wall is the least of your problems," Dominic said calmly. "Get in the car. Now." Realizing she had no actual choice, Chloe climbed into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her in a world of quiet luxury and imminent danger. The SUV immediately pulled away, leaving Tommy hyperventilating against the wall. "Who are you?" Chloe asked, pressing herself against the opposite door. "Dominic Cavallo," he answered, pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the console. He offered it to her. She shook her head. "I run the Chicago Syndicate. I'm sure you've read about my family." Chloe's blood ran cold. The Cavallos. They weren't just a mafia family, they were the Mafia family. Extortion, racketeering, politics, they owned half the city. "You're a mob boss," she whispered, the reality of the $10,000 suddenly feeling like a noose around her neck. "I am a businessman," Dominic corrected smoothly, taking a sip of his drink. "And currently, a widower. The night you met me, my wife was killed in a drive-by meant for me. I was ambushed. My men were dead. I had to get Mia off the street before the rival family, the Morettis, found us. You saved my daughter's life. I want to go home," Chloe said, panic finally rising in her chest. "Take the money back. I'll get a loan. Just leave me alone." Dominic turned to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "I'm afraid that's no longer possible, Chloe. You see, the Morettis pulled the traffic camera footage from the intersection near your apartment. They tracked my movements. They know I went into your building, and they know I came out." He leaned forward, the faint scent of cedarwood invading her senses. 30 minutes ago, my men intercepted a Moretti hit squad entering your apartment complex. They were coming to torture you to find out where I went." Chloe stopped breathing. The dingy apartment, the clanking radiator, her entire world, suddenly it was a war zone. "You can't go back there," Dominic stated, his voice devoid of pity but thick with an undeniable, heavy responsibility. "You belong to my world now. Because if I leave you on the street, you won't survive the week." "Where are you taking me?" she choked out, staring at the blurred city lights through the tinted glass. "Home," Dominic said softly. "To my estate. You kept my daughter safe for one night, Chloe Henderson. Now, I am going to keep you safe for the rest of your life." The Cavallo estate was located in Lake Forest, an ultra-exclusive suburb north of Chicago, where the driveways were measured in miles and the wrought iron gates were meant to keep out anything less than a multimillionaire. For Chloe, stepping out of the Lincoln Navigator and staring up at the sprawling limestone-clad mansion felt like stepping onto another planet. She was immediately ushered inside by heavily armed men in tailored suits, a stark contrast to the quiet elegance of the foyer, which boasted a sweeping double staircase and a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than the entire Bridgeport apartment complex. "Mrs. Gable will show you to your room," Dominic said, shrugging off his overcoat. A stern-faced older woman in a neat gray dress stepped forward, nodding respectfully. "You are not to leave the grounds, Chloe. for your own safety. Am I a guest, Dominic, or a prisoner? Chloe asked, her voice echoing slightly in the massive hall. Dominic paused on the first step of the staircase, his dark eyes locking onto hers. You are alive. For now, let that be enough. The first week was agonizing. Chloe's room was the size of her entire old apartment, featuring a marble ensuite bathroom, a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, and a wardrobe filled with clothes in her exact size, an unsettling detail that reminded her just how thoroughly the syndicate had investigated her. She was allowed to roam the house and the walled gardens, but always with a shadow. Usually, it was a broad-shouldered enforcer named Declan, Dominic's trusted lieutenant. Her only solace was Mia. The little girl clung to Chloe, dragging her into the playroom to build elaborate towers out of blocks or read stories. Chloe realized quickly that the massive house was largely empty of warmth. Dominic was perpetually sequestered in his study behind heavy oak doors, managing a war that Chloe could only hear snippets of hushed arguments, slammed phones, and the frequent departures of black SUVs in the dead of night. On the 8th night, the silence of the house broke Chloe's patience. After putting Mia to bed, she marched downstairs and pushed past the 2 guards stationed outside Dominic's study. They moved to intercept her, but Dominic, seated behind a massive mahogany desk littered with blueprints and ledgers, raised a hand, let her in. The heavy doors clicked shut behind her. The room smelled of fine tobacco, leather, and the ever-present cedarwood. I can't do this anymore, Chloe said, crossing her arms. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans from the wardrobe, looking entirely out of place among the antique furniture and shadowy violence of his world. I am going out of my mind. I need to know what is happening. My manager at the diner is going to call the police to file a missing persons report. It's been handled, Dominic said without looking up from his papers. O'Rourke received a generous anonymous donation and a letter in your handwriting stating you've moved to California for a new job. Chloe stared at him, horrified by the absolute ease with which he had erased her existence. You forged my handwriting? I protected you. Dominic finally looked up, his expression strained. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Victor Moretti has put a $500,000 bounty on your head, Chloe. He knows you saw my face the night I was weak. He knows you patched me up. In his eyes, you are an asset to me, which makes you a target to him. I am not an asset, Chloe shouted, her frustration boiling over. I'm a waitress who made the mistake of having a conscience, and now I'm trapped in a museum while you fight a war. Dominic stood up, his massive frame imposing even from across the room. He walked slowly around the desk until he was standing mere inches from her. Chloe held her ground, refusing to shrink back, though her heart hammered violently against her ribs. You think this is easy for me? Dominic's voice was a low, dangerous whisper, rough with an emotion he rarely showed. To bring an innocent civilian into my home? My wife was murdered 3 months ago because my security failed. I had to watch her bleed out in the back of a car while I held my daughter. Chloe's anger faltered, replaced by a sudden, heavy ache in her chest. I brought you here, Dominic continued, reaching out slowly. His rough, calloused thumb gently brushed the line of her jaw, sending a shockwave of heat through her skin. Because when I looked into your eyes in that terrible apartment, I didn't see fear. I saw fire. And right now, in the middle of this nightmare, you are the only real thing in this house. Chloe looked up into his eyes, seeing the ruthless Mafia boss strip away to reveal a man desperately trying to hold his fractured world together. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a week. If I'm staying, Chloe whispered, her voice steady, you have to teach me how to survive. No more hiding behind your guards. A slow, predatory smile touched Dominic's lips. Tomorrow at dawn, we go to the basement range, wear comfortable shoes. Over the next 3 weeks, the dynamic in the estate shifted. Chloe spent her mornings in the subterranean shooting range, the deafening cracks of a Glock 19 becoming as familiar to her as the clatter of dishes at the diner once was. Dominic was a demanding, unforgiving instructor, correcting her stance, her grip, and her breathing with a strict intimacy that left them both constantly hyper-aware of each other. By night, they would sit by the fireplace in the library. They talked not about the syndicate or the Moretti family, but about Chloe's late mother, about Dominic's childhood in Sicily before he built his empire in Chicago, and about Mia's future. The undeniable, consuming attraction between them grew from a spark into a quiet inferno, though neither crossed the final line, held back by the impending threat of Victor Moretti. That threat arrived on a Tuesday, amidst a blinding, unseasonal snowstorm that effectively cut off the estate from the main roads. It was 2 a.m. Chloe was asleep in her room when the power abruptly cut out. The comforting hum of the central heating died, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. A moment later, the backup generators failed to kick in. Chloe sat up instantly, her training taking over. She slid out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor, and reached under her mattress for the loaded Glock 19 Dominic had insisted she keep. Her bedroom door clicked open. Chloe leveled the gun in the dark. A flashlight beam clicked on, hitting the floor. "Chloe, it's Declan," a hushed voice said. Dominic's lieutenant stepped into the room, holding a suppressed tactical rifle. "The perimeter has been breached. Moretti's men cut the hard lines and the backup power. Dominic sent me to get you and Mia to the safe room in the sublevel." "Where is Dominic?" Chloe asked, keeping the gun pointed slightly downward but ready. "Holding the front hall with the rest of the men. We have to move now." Chloe nodded, slipping on a pair of boots and following Declan down the dark, sweeping hallway toward Mia's room. They scooped the sleeping child up. Mia whined softly, burying her face into Chloe's shoulder. "Hush, baby. It's a game," Chloe whispered, her heart in her throat. They moved quickly toward the rear service stairs. But as they descended into the pitch-black kitchen, something felt horribly wrong. The estate was too quiet. If Moretti's men were breaching the front hall, there should be gunfire. There should be shouting. Chloe glanced at Declan's tactical vest in the dim moonlight filtering through the snow-covered windows. His radio, the lifeline of the estate's security, was turned off. A chilling realization washed over her. The Morettis hadn't tracked Dominic to her apartment through traffic cameras. Only a handful of people had known Dominic's route that night. The rat wasn't some low-level street soldier. It was the man leading her into the dark. "Declan," Chloe said, stopping near the heavy steel doors that led to the loading dock. "The safe room is the other way." Declan stopped. He slowly turned around, the muzzle of his rifle lowering. "Change of plans, Chloe. Victor wants to meet you." "You sold him out," Chloe breathed, clutching Mia tighter. "You killed Dominic's wife." "It was just business," Declan said coldly. "Dominic is old school. He refuses to move into the narcotics trade. Victor is offering a partnership that will make us billions. Dominic is a dinosaur, and you and the kid are my leverage to make him surrender." He raised the rifle, aiming it at Chloe's chest. "Now, open the loading dock door. Victor's men are waiting outside." "No," Chloe said. "Don't be stupid, waitress. I will shoot you in the leg and drag you out there." Chloe calculated the distance. 10 feet. She shifted Mia entirely to her left hip, freeing her right hand. "I said, open the..." Chloe didn't hesitate. She didn't freeze like the girl in the apartment would have. She brought the Glock up in a fluid, practiced motion, exactly as Dominic had drilled into her muscle memory, and pulled the trigger twice. The deafening roar of the gunshots shattered the silence of the house. Declan screamed as the first hollow-point round shattered his right collarbone, spinning him backward. His rifle clattered to the tile floor. Before Declan could reach for his sidearm with his left hand, the heavy oak doors of the kitchen burst open. Dominic stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 loyal guards, a sleek submachine gun in his hands. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second. The disabled security cameras, the open loading dock door, Declan bleeding on the floor, and Chloe standing firm, her gun still raised, shielding his daughter. Dominic's eyes burned with a terrifying, absolute fury. He walked over to Declan, who was writhing and coughing on the floor. "Dominic, please," Declan gasped, blood pooling on the white tiles. "Victor, he forced me." "You let the wolves into my house," Dominic said softly, his voice devoid of any humanity. He raised his weapon. And you threaten my family. A short, suppressed burst ended the betrayal. Dominic turned, dropping the magazine from his weapon and letting it clatter to the floor. He walked over to Chloe, who was trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading. He gently took the Glock from her shaking hand and pulled both her and Mia into a crushing embrace. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, burying his face in Chloe's hair. "No," she sobbed quietly, dropping her forehead against his chest. "I'm okay. We're okay." "Victor Moretti is dead," Dominic murmured fiercely against her skin. "My men hit his compound 10 minutes ago. It's over. The war is over." He pulled back slightly, framing Chloe's face in his blood-stained hands. He looked at her not as a liability and not as a civilian, but as an equal. "I can give you a new name, a new life. Away from me, away from this violence. You can leave tonight." Chloe looked at the man who had turned her life upside down, at the little girl clinging to her leg, and at the brutal, blood-soaked reality of the world she had stepped into. She didn't want to go back to the diner. She didn't want to go back to being a victim of the Tommy Callahans of the world. She reached up, her hands resting over his. "I'm not going anywhere, Dominic," Chloe said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm already home." Dominic's eyes darkened with fierce possession and profound relief. He leaned down and captured her lips in a bruising, desperate kiss, sealing a pact written in gunpowder and survival, binding the ordinary girl from Bridgeport to the most dangerous man in Chicago forever. The Bridgeport apartment was a distant memory, replaced by the guarded walls of the Lake Forest estate. Chloe Henderson had opened her door to a bleeding stranger and unwittingly traded her ordinary struggles for a life of beautiful, terrifying chaos. Beside Dominic and Mia, she found a family forged in fire. She was no longer a diner waitress. She was the untouchable queen of the Chicago syndicate,